Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I want to thank members of the House Republican Conference as well as our special guest, who I will introduce shortly. This is part of a series of events highlighting the impact of Biden's border crisis on the American people. Earlier this week, we hosted a press conference with our colleagues from the Texas delegation, who highlighted the existential and national security threat that the invasion at our southern border that they're facing every single day. Before we get into this conversation, I wanted to first turn it over to our Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who has been a stalwart leader on the issue of securing the border, and then I will be moderating this event and look forward to hearing from our guests and our other members. Speaker Mike Johnson.
Thank you, Elise. Our Republican Conference Chair, she has also been a great leader on this, as have my colleagues who you see around this room. We are dialed in on this. This is not just a major priority. I think this is the #1 priority for House Republicans, and we've been reflecting that since the very beginning of this Congress. We passed H.R. 2 now 9 months ago, that it was the Secure the Border Act, which would have solved this catastrophe before it got so out of control. I want to thank the participants on the panel today, the experts in the area, and your input on this is of great importance to us, and we thank you for your time and commitment to be here, all of you. We look forward to hearing what you have to say. I gave a speech on the floor here just a brief time ago. We called it the magic minute. The Speaker gets that prerogative. It's the first time I've used it since I became Speaker a little less than 100 days ago. And I chose this topic because it is the #1 topic on the hearts and minds of the American people. This is a catastrophe. There's no other way to describe it. And we've all seen it with our own eyes. Many of us have been to the border multiple times. Most recently, January 3rd, we brought the largest congressional delegation that has ever visited the border to see it with their own eyes. 64 House Republicans were gathered there from more than half the states in the country. And what we saw was infuriating and heartbreaking at the same time. The processing of people as if they're some sort of commodities in these processing centers, undocumented young children who are unaccompanied as well, who have been subjected to all sorts of evil on their journey there at the hands of the cartels and traffickers. The fentanyl that's poured over the border, flooded over the border. We all know the statistics. It's the leading cause of death of Americans now, aged 18 to 46. This is completely out of control. The numbers are staggering. You're talking about millions and millions of illegals who have come into our country, and they're being sent distributed throughout the nation. Some of them with notices not to return again, supposedly to an immigration judge for a decade. It is not a sustainable situation. Everyone knows it, and what I emphasized on the floor today is that the President of the United States needs to step up and fulfill his statutory obligation. He has a responsibility to fix the catastrophe that their actions specifically have created. It is by design. I made reference on the floor today that during the Obama administration, by way of comparison, they detained 82% of the illegals who came across the border just a few years ago. Right now, the Biden administration is releasing 85%. How do you go from 82% detained to 85% released and it not be a deliberate action? It is. And that's why Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is going to be impeached. The House Homeland Security Committee finished that work, completed at about 1:15 a.m. this morning, and that is a necessary job that is overdue. We'll be moving that to the House floor expeditiously, and the House will do its job. We'll do our job. We'll continue to do our job, the House Republican majority, and we're calling upon the President to use his very clear, very obvious statutory authority that he has right now and has had since the day he walked into the office to fix this mess. He's taken 64 specific actions, executive orders and through his administration, to create the chaos, and we need it to end. I'll yield back because there's a lot that needs to be said here. I'll be coming in and out because we've got multiple things going on, but I'm truly, truly grateful for all of you, your dedication, Elise, for your leadership, and for the insight that we'll get today. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'll next go to our House Majority Whip, Tom Emmer. And I think it's important to note, under the leadership of this entire House Republican Conference, but Tom Emmer as Whip, we passed the strongest border security bill ever in the history of Congress. Tom.
Well, thank you, Elise. And Mr. Speaker, thank you for your leadership, especially on this issue, but on a whole bunch of things that we've been dealing with. I want to say good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for all being here. Joe Biden and the Democrats' open borders agenda has created the worst crisis we've ever seen. Just look at the numbers. There have been more than 8.3 million illegal crossings nationwide since Joe Biden took office. There have been 1.7 million known gotaways, the key word here being known. We don't know how much bigger it might be. And just last month, there were more than 302,000 illegal immigrants encountered at the southern border, the highest single month ever. But this problem isn't exclusive to our southern border, because we all want to focus on that all the time. In my home state of Minnesota, a member of the Al-Shabaab terrorist group was recently arrested after being caught at the southern border and then released back into the country free for the past year. This is happening with Al-Shabaab, and it's happening with other persons on the terrorist watch list. And fentanyl, by the way, is involved in 62% of overdose deaths in my state of Minnesota. Biden's border crisis has turned every community into a border community, and the American people have been looking to us for relief. That begins with accountability, which is why early this morning the Homeland Security Committee, as you heard the speaker say, voted to advance articles of impeachment against Secretary Mayorkas for his willful refusal to comply with the laws passed by Congress and for breaching Americans' trust. And the next step will be taking this case to the House floor for a vote, which I believe our speaker is planning on next week. House Republicans, as our conference chair already mentioned, passed H.R. 2, the strongest border security bill in 20 years, and that was last May. And the Senate and the President have done nothing. If the Biden White House and the Schumer Senate want to step up and join us in securing the border, we will gladly have that conversation. But any border deal that normalizes even one illegal crossing will be dead on arrival in the House. I want to thank the outside stakeholders here with us for their hard work and support on this important issue. And I also want to thank members of our conference for fighting for accountability and common sense solutions that actually will secure the border. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you to the Majority Whip. I'm going to introduce our guests here today, as well as our members of Congress, and then we're going to start the Q&A portion. So first I want to introduce Brandon Judd, who is president of the National Border Patrol Council and has served as a Border Patrol agent for over 20 years. Next to Brandon, we have Sheriff Michael Chapman, who serves as Sheriff of Loudoun County, Virginia, and is the chairman of the National Sheriff's Association Homeland Security Committee. And we have Ann Basham, founder of the Interparliamentary Task Force on Human Trafficking and CEO and founder of Ascend Consulting, which works to inform on issues including human trafficking, domestic violence, poverty, and education. We're also going to hear from members from different states across our nation who are an incredibly important part of our House Republican Conference. Right here is Congressman Darren LaHood from Illinois. We have Congresswoman Carol Miller from West Virginia, Congresswoman Nicole Maliotakis, a fellow New Yorker, and Congresswoman Monica De La Cruz from Texas. Thank you all so much for the time to be here, for our special guests and for our members. I'm going to kick it off with the first question. And I would like to start with you, Brandon. As you know, I represent a border district, but on the northern border. And we've not only seen the existential threat on the southern border and the invasion on the southern border, but the Swanton sector, which I represent on the northern border, we've seen an increase of over 500% in just the past year of illegals crossing the northern border. As president of the National Border Patrol Council, can you provide an overall situational update on what you're seeing on the border, both on the southern and northern border, and how much this is a historic threat we're facing right now?
Absolutely. Congresswoman, Chairwoman, I apologize. I'm here as the voice of all of our Border Patrol agents. They have asked me to come here. They've asked me to express their concerns. And those concerns are not just about the southwest border. In fact, when you look at the southwest border and you look at the destabilization of that border, it actually has an impact across the entire United States. We don't just patrol the southwest border, we patrol the northern border. We also patrol the coastal border. And we have seen a huge impact in the numbers that are crossing our borders. And what really worries me about the northern border, and having patrolled there for 8 years, 3 in Maine and 5 in Montana, what concerns me is it was widely known that if terrorists wanted to enter our country, they were going to enter our country from the northern border, simply because of how easy it is to come into Canada. And you come into Canada, get that visitor visa, and then you work your way down to the northern border, and you cross into the United States from there. And so when you look at the way the cartels work, when you look at these transnational criminal organizations, they know exactly how to exploit our resources. And they do that starting on the southwest border, and then they work their way up to the northern border. And these numbers that you're pointing out, it has a huge impact what happens on the southwest border because of the depletion of our resources up on the northern border. And when you don't have those resources, you can't properly patrol the border. I appreciate Speaker Johnson pointing out that it's 85%. It's actually at least 85%. That number goes up depending upon the ebbs and flows of any given month, but it's at least 85%. And then on top of that, you have to add on what ICE is also releasing. So when we transfer custody from the Border Patrol to ICE, they also release a percentage of those individuals. And again, looking at the impact that it has on the northern border, that is an area that the cartels are currently exploiting. We have no idea what the gotaways are up on the northern border. You know, talking House Whip Emer talking about the gotaways. We just have no idea because we don't have the resources to properly understand what's going on there, simply because this administration has destabilized our southwest border.
Thank you very much, Brandon. I'm next going to introduce Congressman Darren LaHood from Illinois.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Stefanik and Chairwoman Stefanik, and I want to acknowledge our leadership, particularly Speaker Johnson and Whip Emmer and Chairwoman Stefanik for holding this hearing today, and of our members, witnesses here today, and particularly from law enforcement. Thanks for your service and dedication to our country. I never thought I would say this, but many communities in Illinois are now border towns. If you go back 3 years ago, there was no border crisis when we left the Trump administration. Today, there's a border crisis in Illinois. And when I look at the failed policies that we're seeing from Democrats here in Washington and Democrat-controlled states like New York and Illinois, it's happening everywhere. And as Chairwoman Stefanik talked about, my district covers part of the Chicagoland area. And so I have the excerpts of Chicago. And last week I traveled throughout my district, and the number one issue that I heard was from local municipal leaders, mayors, police chiefs, community leaders, small businesses that have all been affected by the border crisis and the impact that it has had on our communities. In Illinois, Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson support radical sanctuary cities, soft on crime policies, and these have hamstrung our police force and are only exacerbating the crisis in our state. Over 17,000 migrants have arrived in Chicago since August of 2022, with many being sent to communities outside the city because of overrun resources. We have seen increases in retail and violent crime, with police resources being diverted and spikes in the flow of drugs throughout our communities. In a former life, I was a federal prosecutor. And as a federal prosecutor, I prosecuted immigration cases, sent people back to the country of origin, and enforced the rule of law. That was under an administration, the Bush administration, that enforced the rule of law when it came to immigration. This is an administration that refuses to do that, and we're seeing the consequences of that. Particularly in Chicago in the recent months, I've also seen the low morale with our police force because of what they have to deal with. In addition, recruiting numbers for our police force in Chicago at an all-time low because of the radical open border, soft on crime policies being implemented by the Biden administration, Governor J.B. Pritzker, and mayors like Brandon Johnson in Chicago. Now, we should all be compassionate, but we are a country based on the rule of law. And until we enforce the rule of law, end radical sanctuary city policies, and secure the border, every community, big and small, rural, suburban, and urban, will feel the impact of this crisis. And we will continue to see the deterioration of our great cities like Chicago and New York. With that, I have a question that I'd like to ask Sheriff Chapman, Sheriff Chapman, as I just mentioned, in Chicago, we've seen firsthand the increased use of drugs in crime. How have American sheriffs been impacted by what you're seeing in terms of increased crime and the influence of the cartels bleeding into our communities?
Well, thank you for that question. And I would say to one of the comments that you made, I think every state in the union has become a border state. I can tell you, the fentanyl problem especially is impacting everybody. And as we know, last year, 107,000 overdose deaths, and 70% of which were fentanyl related. The year before that, I think it was like about 100,000, a little bit in that area. And what we're seeing is they're constantly going up. What concerns me and what I'm seeing, even in a place like Loudoun County, where I'm from, which is one of the safest counties in the nation. In fact, Bloomberg had us as the safest county in the nation about a year and a half ago. Even with that, we're seeing an uptick in fentanyl-related issues, and certainly with the youth. What we're seeing now with fentanyl overdoses, where I would say a couple of years ago we were seeing 25 to 35 age bracket. Before that, maybe 20 to 35. Now we're seeing it 15 to 20 years old. And in fact, in just a 3-week period, back in September, out of one high school district, we had 9 overdoses, and we had 4 of those that actually happened at school, in which CPR and other first aid had to take place. So even in states and localities where you would think it's pretty safe, the impact of fentanyl is significant everywhere. And I would say from our standpoint, that's impacting everybody across the country, especially on the border. Now, working with our border sheriffs and knowing many of them down and what they have to deal with, just the resources that they're taxed with because of all the people that are coming across the border and the extra work that it takes just to do that, to do the job that they have to do is just outrageous. So I think it's very tough across the board. We're doing the best we can with the resources that we have. It can be demoralizing to law enforcement when you don't feel like you're getting the support that you need to do your job. And so I think we're doing the best we can with what we have. But it's a very important question, and we're doing everything we can to try to combat that.
Well, thank you for that, Sheriff. Appreciate your service. Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague from Texas, one of our incredible members of the freshman class, Congresswoman Monica De La Cruz.
Thank you, Congressman. My name is Monica De La Cruz, and I represent Deep South Texas, Texas 15. And the illegal immigration is affecting our community. But when you think about illegal immigration and the communities that are affected, we must not forget our brave men and women who serve on Border Patrol and in Customs, and the mental health that they are experiencing. Right now, because of Biden's failure, we are seeing the deterioration of Border Patrol agents' mental health with high suicide rates among our agents. These are the brave men and women that are at the front lines dealing with Biden's disastrous open border crisis. Let me help people understand this. We had 10 million illegal immigrants come through our border. 10 million. To put that into perspective, the state of Texas is 30 million. 1/3 of our country, 10 million have come through our border, 1/3 of the size of Texas. This is a gross failure on the Biden administration, not only because of the illegal immigrants who are coming, but the illegal drugs, and most importantly, and what saddens me, is the sex trafficking, not just for women or of women, but of children as well. Now, my question is for Ms. Anna Basham. As we observe the last days of National Human Trafficking Prevention Month, and something that is very serious in my district and we're seeing on the border, my question to you is, can you educate us on what you are working on and how the House Republicans can help fight the scourge of human trafficking and defend the hundreds of thousands of victims?
Absolutely, and I just want to thank you, first of all, for putting a focus on this, because this issue of human trafficking is also central to this issue of the border crisis, and children are actually at the heart of it. So I have a very unique vantage point because I deal with a lot of organizations who work domestically on human trafficking and anti-trafficking. I also am the former senior advisor at the Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime, which is the largest federal funder of domestic anti-trafficking efforts, and I currently founded and chair, as she mentioned, an international organization where I work with lawmakers from throughout the world who are on the front lines internationally. So I'm going to give you a real quick level set on what human trafficking is and what it looks like with the border, and a few suggestions for what can be done. First of all, it's important to note that those who cross the border are largely from 3 countries. In fact, 47% come from one country in particular, and that is Guatemala. And with that, there are 24 different dialects. Now, en route there, I have been to Guatemala. I went there, about a year and a half ago. I have met with the Secretary of Trafficking there, and I will tell you that they do not want their children, they do not want to lose their children, but that's what's happening because of the push-pull factors. I want to read a quote by President Obama that was spoken in 2014. It said, "Don't send your children unaccompanied. They may not make it." If more Central American parents knew the truth of what their children would experience, many would think again. I also just want to give a couple statistics too. I know a lot of us know these statistics, but when it comes to children, there were 24,000 referrals for unaccompanied minors in 2013. That was 11 years ago. And in 10 years later, it was 118,000. That is such a significant increase, and those are children. And so I think this is one of those issues where we might be divided on a lot of other things, but I believe that this is a way that we can come together and agree that no child should be harmed, that all children should be protected, and because of that, things should be prevented. I also want to highlight something that wasn't really just from an international perspective that may have missed, but there actually is a UN immigration document that just came out, and it listed that they are now providing funding to those who are crossing the border. In fact, a migrant family gets up to $800 a month in debit cards, and they list in this document, which is public, and I'm going to quote it, it says that one of the reasons is that U.S. policies, quote, newly established opportunities for regular pathways to move to the United States of America for those who could make their way to northern Mexico. So that is a quote that is from the United Nations, and it is a recent quote, and I don't have time to dive into all of that, but $372 million in planned cash giveaways to the 624,000 immigrants moving north. That's what that is what's happening. But what I want to highlight and what we can do here in the House of Representatives is several very key things. First of all, this has created an enormous human trafficking to foster care pipeline problem, and that is a U.S. problem. So in the United States, 60% of trafficking victims have been in the foster care system at one time. That's a fact. And that was prior to the crisis on the border. That has only increased. In fact, now, and as you've so wisely put, this is no longer every state is a border state. In fact, it's not just Texas, it's South Carolina. They're having to put their children in offices for DCS just so that the children can be housed because there are no homes for them. And that is happening because of the increase in unaccompanied minors. And our foster care system was already very broken. So the number one thing that we can do here in the House from a human trafficking perspective with that is to increase accountability. And I'm looking at the child side of it. There are 5 new bills that are here. Some of them, one of them is the Report Act, the SHIELD Act. They're incredibly bipartisan. In fact, I just came from a hearing in the other chamber with Mark Zuckerberg. I'm sure you all knew about it. But the big thing is that this is an area where we can come together and have incredible bipartisan efforts and agree that no child should be harmed. So number 2, we can really focus on prevention. So really preventing this, the best protection for any child is prevention. So we can prevent it right here in the United States by encouraging policies that really address things like the no trafficking in school zones, which is coming out of Texas. And that really focuses on prevention efforts within our children here in the United States, but we can also really look at foster care policies as well, and making sure that there are accountability measures such as recordings of all child interviews with ORR, or recordings with all child interviews by CPS or DCS. Right now, none of those are being recorded, and children are falling through the cracks left and right, and that's why we have 85,000 missing children right now. And that needs to stop, and I think everyone in this country agrees that that needs to stop. And there are some very specific and clear ways that we can do that by increasing accountability, increasing prevention efforts, and coming together on these issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and it's astounding, those numbers, and this just isn't happening in Texas. I want our audience to know that human trafficking, child sex trafficking happens in all of the country. We find that stash houses, not just in lower income neighborhoods, but shockingly in middle and even upper class neighborhoods. It's absolutely shocking. It's not just human trafficking that we're worried about, but it's also the Chinese fentanyl that is crossing our border as well. As a mother of 2 teens, it worries me sick that fentanyl is in our schools, it's in our neighborhoods, and it is really taking the American dream from our children. I'm going to hand this off to Congresswoman Carol Miller to tell us a little bit about how it's affecting her in her state.
Thank you, Monica. I'm so glad you're a member of Congress. You bring so much experience and knowledge to us. I've said this before, and I will say it again. President Biden's policies on the border are not working. I taught my children that when they did something wrong and made a mistake, to own up to that mistake and then do something about it to fix it. Joe Biden needs to do the same thing. There is just too much at stake here in our country. While we geographically are not a border state in West Virginia, we have felt the effects of the crisis at the border for years, especially regarding the fentanyl crisis. In 2023, 1,398 overdose deaths were reported in West Virginia. So imagine how many weren't reported. 70% of those were opioids and synthetic opioids, primarily fentanyl. West Virginia has long struggled with the devastating effects of the opioid epidemic. After years of positive progress, the crisis then exploded due to the unprecedented lockdowns that we had with COVID, the pandemic, and the steady flow of the drugs that kept coming in from the southern border. Just last month, Customs and Border Patrol seized 1,846 pounds of fentanyl. Coming right here, that's enough to kill more than 400 million people. That's terrible. We all know someone who has been personally affected by fentanyl and the crisis. And it is unacceptable that our young people are dying as a result of bad border policy. The Biden administration doesn't seem to care how our young people are dying from this border problem. This angers, and it quite frankly astounds me. House Republicans passed the Halt Fentanyl Act to stop the flow of fentanyl into our communities and combat the shipment that's coming across the border. The passage of the Halt Fentanyl Act in the House was a great first step. But as with H.R. 2, the bill is being held up in the Senate by the Democrats and the White House. This is unacceptable. Republicans acted when we passed H.R. 2, which increases border security. Funding provides the highest level of funding for our agents and increases the ICE custody operations. The whole country knows that this is a problem, and the Republicans have brought forward a solution to fix it. There's no time to play games and pass the blame around when it comes to the safety of Americans. Everybody knows someone who's suffering from addiction. They could be in the line at the grocery store when you're checking out. They could be sitting in the pew next to you in church, and you don't know that they're suffering. But we all know families that have been directly affected. Sheriff Chapman, you're from Virginia, right next door. And you know how we feel about our men in blue and the people who protect us. We have our own way. And you do such an important work to keep our communities safe. How can we, as members of Congress, help support our American sheriffs and law enforcement, especially with the fentanyl epidemic?
You know, I served, before I became a sheriff, I served 23 years with the Drug Enforcement Administration, and I did do 3 or 4 years in McAllen on the border down there. And I can tell you that what's going on now is just outrageous in comparison to even what it was back then. And I thought it was pretty bad back then as a supervisor on the border. I can tell you that what we need to do is enforce the laws that are on the books. We need to have some help with this, and we need to enforce what's out there. When I was with the Drug Enforcement Administration, I started out in Miami back in the mid to late 80s, and that's when the cocaine wars were in full swing, and I thought it was bad then. When I look at, last year 107,000 overdose deaths, 100,000 before that, 90,000 before that, the year before that, and I look at what's going on. I've never seen drug trafficking in a way where you're actually killing your customers, and you used to see a lot of violence with drug trafficking because people were trying to get market share. Now they're actually killing their customers, and it's a shame because, like as I mentioned before, what we're seeing now is the age brackets are going down. About 7-8 years ago, we saw what was a significant heroin problem. We started to address that. Then it was heroin with fentanyl. Then it was heroin with carfentanil, which was more potent than fentanyl. Then you have, then it went to straight fentanyl. Now it's fentanyl with xylazine. So the drugs keep getting worse and worse, and we need to stop the flow of what's coming on over the border down there, and we need to support our law enforcement. That what concerns me is over the past couple of years, law enforcement hasn't been supported. It's been demonized, and you have over 800,000 law enforcement professionals out there in the United States. You have 18,000 organizations, and you have, in our job, I think it was about 650 million nationally citizen contacts with law enforcement in a given year. And when you think about it, we have certainly a handful of people that don't do their job well, but it's just a handful. I mean, you look at the vast majority of law enforcement personnel out there are doing a great job protecting the citizens that they serve, and we need to be supported with what we do. We need to be able to enforce the law. We need to allow Border Patrol and the folks on the border do their job. We need to stop taxing our sheriffs down there with the extra work that they have to do because they're not getting the support that we need. We need to have people support the men and women in blue or whatever uniform that you wear. We're all working in this to try to keep this country safe. And that's what I'm seeing is we need to have a little bit more support than we're getting here. And we're doing everything we can with the resources that we have, but we got to keep on trying. And we need all the help that we can get.
When I was down there about 1.5 years, that was the message that I got. And one of the Border Patrol told me the worst day of his life was the day that he pulled a Haitian woman that was pregnant with twins out of the water, and she had drowned. And people don't realize the mental health issues. You have these people that are working 60-hour weeks. They're underpaid, they're stressed, they're bringing things from home to help. And so I agree with you. And so the impact of fentanyl has increased the crime that's being felt all over our nation. And Americans, they're fed up. Immigration now beats inflation as the #1 issue, the American voters. And so I'd like to pass this over to my friend, Congresswoman Malliotakis from New York, to discuss how New Yorkers are feeling about the Biden border crisis.
Before we go to Nicole, I just want to invite, if there are other members, I have an open seat right here if Congresswoman Boebert wants to join us as members come and go. Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol, for your work in highlighting how fentanyl is destroying communities. I woke up this morning and got on the phone with the director of ICE for New York because in my city, we saw 2 police officers beat by a mob of migrants in Times Square. And I told the ICE director quite clearly, I want these individuals to be deported, period. We cannot accept in this country people who have paid the cartels thousands of dollars to be smuggled here, and then they're in our city committing crimes. And why are they in New York? Well, because our mayor decided to provide housing, education, legal services, laundry services, food, you name it. And so it's incentivizing more people to come to New York City. But you're seeing that not all of them are innocent asylum seekers, as our mayor claims. I can go through a bunch of articles here, which we don't have time for, but another woman was arrested for slapping NYPD officer in the face. Okay, another illegal immigrant bites off a police sergeant's finger after a DUI bust. Asylum seeker accused of killing another at the Randall's Island shelter, which we, the taxpayers in New York City, are paying for. Migrant stabbed by girlfriend in a possible love triangle. Okay, this is what's happening in New York, and it's happening all too often, and we need to do something about it. And the president could end this today if he simply undoes his executive orders that created this mess, and if my mayor stops misinterpreting New York City's right to shelter law, which is intended only for New Yorkers. And what's really unfair is, look, we're New York City. We are a nation, a city of immigrants. We're welcoming. And I have many immigrants in my district, my parents included. I met last week with a woman from Belarus who's been here since 2017, a clear asylum case because she was politically persecuted in her country. She's been here, she's been legal, she's been working, she's been doing everything right, waiting patiently, and her court case is getting pushed to the back of the line. Why? Because the president has a last-in, first-in approach where the people who are coming over the border, paying the drug smugglers thousands of dollars, they're getting first priority and their hearings are being heard first. And that was what immigration told me directly when I inquired as to why this person's was delayed so long. So it's not fair to the people who've come the right way and have been waiting patiently, doing everything right, and that has to be addressed. Enriching the cartels, that's what's happening. I just said $32 million a week. But what really concerns me, and maybe Brandon can help shed some light on this issue, is, look, I'm from New York City, right? Post 9/11 world. Look at the board. 361 people on the terror watch list were stopped at the southern border alone. You mentioned there's not enough people on the northern border. We didn't even know how many maybe came into the northern border. But in addition to the roughly 8 million people who are claiming asylum, which, by the way, only half of them actually qualify, maybe less, because if you look at the court data, more than half of the people claiming asylum are doing it to gain entry, and then they are denied when they actually get to court. Further pushing my constituent who came the right way down the line, clogging up the immigration system. But in addition to those people, you're talking about 1.8 million that have come in or undetected. That's what CBP estimates. We don't know who they are, where they are, or what their intention is. And that is what scares me the most as a New Yorker in a post 9/11 world. Can you please give us your thoughts on that? And is there reason to be concerned?
Yeah, so the actual estimate is going to be that there's been more than close to 4 million people that have crossed our borders illegally and have been able to evade apprehension. That 1.8 million people, that's what we actually detected. So that's not an estimate, we actually know that's what crossed the border, we saw them. So when you look at this issue and when you look at this problem, you're constantly going to hear and the rhetoric rather than giving actual facts, and what really frustrates and upsets us is when you hear Joe Biden say, well, I've asked for money. This is not a money issue. This strictly is a policy issue. If he were to give us the policy, what he wants to do is he wants to put the cart before the horse. If you give me more drones, if you give me more ground sensors, if you give me more remote video surveillance, all that's going to do is count the gotaways. That's all it's going to do. It does not allow us to go out and actually apprehend these individuals because the cartels recognize that all they have to do is flood our resources, and when they flood our resources in one specific area, it requires us to send those resources to that area, which takes our agents out of the field. And when our agents are out of the field, it creates the gaps in our coverage. And when they create that gaps, they control that area, and we just don't know what's coming across. You're going to hear this misnomer, and you're going to hear the far left liberals, and they're going to say, well, all the drugs are coming at the ports of entry. They're not coming between the ports of entry, and that is absolutely false. And the reason that that's false is because those ports of entry, those are secure locations. If the resources exist, every single vehicle can be gone through. But when you don't have agents on the border, and when you can't properly patrol the border, when you have 23 miles that are wide open, everything that comes across there, it would behoove the cartels to actually cross their drugs at that time when they create that opportunity. And that's what they're doing. They're creating an opportunity. On the northern border, they create that opportunity knowing that they flood our resources on the southwest border, which then requires our northern border agents to sit behind a computer and process individuals, and which again destabilizes the northern border and allows drugs to flow across there. In fact, the most potent marijuana used to be what we call BC bud. And that was coming from Canada. We know that things continue to come from Canada in your area. We know that that continues to happen, but if you're not there to actually apprehend them, again, give me drones, great, but those drones are going to count the gotaways. They're not going to allow us to apprehend people.
If I could just add one point, because I think it's important to this discussion. We've caught a number of drug smugglers in New York, and believe it or not, because of New York's ridiculous bail law, they've been released right back onto the streets. And one of the things that ICE is concerned about is that NYPD has their hands tied and they cannot cooperate with ICE. So ICE may have a detainer request for those individuals, and NYPD will just release them back onto the street instead of turning them over to ICE. And that has made it really even more problematic for law enforcement to be able to do their job.
And that's a policy decision, and that's the problem. And that's one of the magnets that draws people to cross our borders illegally. When they recognize that there's going to be no consequences once they get here. And again, I don't mean to correct anybody, but statistics will show that people that claim asylum, it's only about 15% that are granted. So the vast majority of these individuals that claim asylum don't have a legitimate claim, but the problem is the vast majority never show up to their court appearances. So when we're looking at the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, if we want to prove, because we constantly hear, well, you didn't prove your case. If we want to prove that he is actually violating our laws by not enforcing our laws, all you have to do is look at what he said. He said the act of being in this country alone is not enough for an enforcement action. That's his intent. His intent clearly shows that he is not going to enforce the laws. Then he backs it up with action. All you have to do is look at the people that do not show up to the court appearances. That means they violated the rules of their release, and he now has an obligation to go after those individuals, but he's not. And that's where he's violating the law. So, and when he violates the law, what that does is it invites more people to cross our borders illegally. That's the magnet that draws people here. So it is clear that he is in fact violating the law, and if we do not impeach him, then we are allowing him to get away with encouraging the cartels to continue to advertise their services around the world. There must be accountability in our government.
We're next going to go to Congressman Lloyd Smucker from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I appreciate your leadership in this issue. Appreciate Congressman Emmer, Leader Emmer, Whip Emmer, and Speaker Johnson's leadership on this as well. I'll just add maybe one or two things. We've all been at the border. We've seen firsthand what's happening. It's difficult to describe to individuals who haven't seen it firsthand the catastrophe that we have there. That literally each day thousands of individuals are walking up to processing facilities, and there are rows and rows of supplies, shoes in different sizes, clothing, medicine that are given to individuals who've walked in, and then they're released and shipped all around the country. Thousands of people per day. And one of the frustrations, we happened to be there on one visit on a day that they had found a young child dead in the brush. And we saw the toll on the agents of seeing that. But what they're really frustrated with is they aren't able to do their job. They are processing individuals, they're stamping, they're checking records and so on. And up to half of the agents in this particular sector were at these facilities rather than being out patrolling the river and other areas. And it's extremely frustrating to them. They're trained to keep people from coming in, and they're grossly understaffed at a time when we're seeing more people coming than ever before. So it's extremely frustrating for them. One other point. To the issue of this being deliberate on the part of the administration, I serve on the Budget Committee, and the Budget Committee was concerned that money had been allocated for a barrier, for a wall, for technology, and we think unconstitutionally one of the first decisions that the President made was to stop that construction, although he was required by law, appropriated by Congress to build the wall. And so we visited an area where literally the wall is half constructed and been stopped. And then we saw a huge parking lot of miles of wall material just rusting. This had been appropriated, been paid for by the federal government, and was rusting away. And then upon talking to the Border Patrol agents there, it's not just the wall, but there would be watchtowers, there would be technology. They were incredibly disappointed that these tools were not made available to them as they had anticipated. And so again, this is a deliberate decision by the administration to not enforce existing law, to create an open border. And I can tell you it's the number one concern now in folks in my district. My district, by the way, is known for welcoming refugees, for helping people who want to come to the U.S., who want to live the American dream, but they want people to come here legally. We've always vetted immigrants. We want to ensure that they want to be productive members of society. And the concern, as you had mentioned, Mr. Judd, is all the gotaways. We do not know who's here, and people in my district are concerned there could be terrorists here. They're concerned about the fentanyl. They're concerned about the effect on their children. So again, Madam Chairwoman, appreciate your attention to this. This is a great discussion here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. We'll now go to Congressman Rudy Yakum from Indiana.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stefanik, for your leadership on the Biden border crisis. I'd also like to thank our Speaker, Speaker Johnson, as well as Whip Emmer. Under President Biden, every state has become a border state. That includes my home state of Indiana. This is especially true for deadly drugs like fentanyl flowing through our communities from the open border. I've talked with a number of sheriffs in my district about fentanyl, including Pulaski County Sheriff Chris Schramm, who said fentanyl is out of control. Cass County Sheriff Ed Schroeder, who said fentanyl is, quote, wreaking havoc in his communities. Schroeder actually visited the border with other sheriffs recently, and he called it, quote, a career-changing experience that showed just how out of control the border situation is. A few minutes ago, while we're in this press conference, I get a text about an Indianapolis Star story stating that in Indianapolis, there are now, on average, 2 deaths per day from drug overdoses. It's clear that this crisis creates daily challenges for our law enforcement communities. My question for you, Sheriff Chapman, is what has changed between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, and what can be done right now to stem the deadly flow of cartel-fueled drug epidemics?
Well, thank you for that question, and I think a lot of it has to do with just our ability to enforce the law and the support that we get in enforcing the law, and then clearly prosecuting, and a lot of that has to do with your particular locality, who might be your state attorney, your Commonwealth attorney. So that's a challenge, and it certainly has been a challenge. Fortunately, we've flipped the tide a little bit here in Loudoun County, but I would say Northern Virginia's having a difficulty in prosecuting cases, but also working with our federal counterparts and doing everything that we can to get federal charges on people that are certainly causing death. One of the things that we just did here, and fortunately under Virginia law, we were able to charge somebody with terrorism based on drugs that have fallen under the terrorism law. So we're able to expand it a little bit, but I think we have to look and be creative about this. But also, it comes down to support, and if we're not getting the support on law enforcement and we're continually being maligned in our profession, it doesn't help us. Doesn't help us with the citizens that we serve. Doesn't help us with the communities that we're trying to protect. So I would say it's just a matter of keeping the pressure on, enforcing the laws, prosecuting these cases, not letting everybody out, not letting people out on probation that are clearly running drugs and killing people. We've got to really tighten things up, and to do that, we just need some administrative support and some positive backing on what it is that we do.
Thank you, Sheriff, and I'll close with this. President Biden opened the border with the stroke of a pen. He can close it with the stroke of a pen, and I call on him to do just that. Thank you. I yield back.
We'll now go to Congresswoman Lauren Boebert from Colorado.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses who are here today. I appreciate you taking the time to enlighten us, to inform us of what is going on. Many of us, maybe all of us, have been to the border at least once. I've been down there several times and seen firsthand exactly what's going on, what is creating Colorado to be what's causing Colorado to be a border state now, and just the horrible humanitarian crisis that goes along with that. So I appreciate your expertise that you're sharing here today. Ms. Bashman, thank you so much for just acknowledging and providing solutions for the children that we are losing. That truly is the most devastating aspect of everything that is happening at our southern border. Nearly 100,000 children missing. So thank you so much for your dedication and working with members of Congress to provide legislation and solutions so we can be proactive and prevent what is happening with them. So I just wanted to specifically thank you for your work. Obviously, we are facing the most severe border crisis in American history. Since Biden assumed office, over 8 million illegal aliens have crossed our southern border and have come into our interior. There's more than 6.2 million illegal aliens that have been captured and released. 6.2 that have been captured and released. Captured and sent back, that would be fantastic. We would be praising this administration. But also, if that many were being captured and sent back, I don't think we would have the surge that we do at our southern border. And I do believe that Joe Biden, if he would have done nothing at all when he got into office, we would not be experiencing this crisis that we are seeing. If he had done nothing and left President Trump's policies in place, we would not have this. We would not have nearly 100,000 children missing. Colorado would not be #2 in the nation for fentanyl overdoses. We would not have the taxpayer expense that is paying to bus in illegal aliens and to house them and to provide for them. It was said here today that there's some $800 a day that these families are getting in benefits. Now, with our Customs and Border Patrol agents, I've talked to you directly, I've spoke with you, I've heard the stories, and you mentioned this today, Mr. Judd, that it's policy. Policy is what we need to secure our southern border. A lot of people in this town think you just throw money at a problem and it goes away. I haven't seen that solve any problems yet, and I don't think that it's going to. So in hearing this, will you please elaborate on what policies we need to actually secure the border? Because if we do just give you more money, it's only for processing. And I don't think that the processing is very effective, especially when we first had notices to appear, then notices to report. I think it's something even lesser now, and then these folks are not showing up for their hearings. So could you please elaborate on the policies that we need to support our Border Patrol agents at the southern border?
So I sat down and I spoke with Secretary Mayorkas early in the administration. And I said, if you're going to get rid of Remain in Mexico, which they had already done, said you're going to have to replace it with something else. What you're going to need to do is you're going to first need to challenge Flores. Flores, specifically when that was envisioned, the idea was behind that every child has a right to develop outside of a detention facility. I don't disagree with that. I absolutely agree that every child should have the right to develop outside of a detention facility, especially if they're brought here not on their own, if they were brought here by their family members. So that's what Flores envisioned, but Flores never envisioned that these people were not going to show up to their court appearances. So when you go, if the government were to go back and say these people aren't showing up to their court appearances, they're disappearing into what President Obama termed the shadows of society, the courts would then have to look at this and say, okay, we have to do something. There has to be something to be put in place. So we need to challenge Flores. The other thing is we need to hold people into custody. We need to end catch and release. That is the #1 driver of illegal immigration. If we release people into the United States, we are ultimately rewarding them for violating our laws. That's exactly what they want. They want to be in the United States. If we were to hold people in custody pending their deportation or asylum proceedings, they should have the right. Our laws allow them to claim asylum. We're not talking about getting rid of that right. Let them claim asylum, but make sure you hold them in custody pending their asylum proceedings. Now, the pushback is going to be, well, we don't have the facilities to hold 300,000 people per month in custody. You're not going to have to. The moment you start holding the first people that cross the borders illegally in custody, they're going to stop coming. And the reason they're going to stop coming is because they're not going to waste thousands of dollars to criminal cartels knowing that they're going to be held in custody just to be sent back to their country. So they're going to stop coming. So you're not going to have those detention facilities. I spoke with him. I implored him to do exactly that, and he refused. This administration knows that there are solutions outside of Remain in Mexico, but I would say that Remain in Mexico is the perfect policy because our State Department has certified Mexico as a safe country. So if Mexico is in fact a safe country, why can't people wait there pending their asylum proceedings? But if you don't think that's humane, then make sure you come up with other policies that will ensure that we don't release people. The moment we stop releasing people is the moment that they stop coming. And the moment they stop coming, then we can go after the cartels. We can go after the drugs. We can ensure that American citizens' lives will be saved because we'll then have the resources to do exactly what we need to do.
Thank you. And with catch and release, certainly this is a problem, and it sounds like it's incentivizing the surge that we are seeing, and that's why there's 6.2 million that have been caught and released into our country's interior, which is certainly a problem. And now you mentioned the folks that are paying money to the cartel. They're buying their way into our country through the cartel, and it seems that the cartel have more operational control of our southern border than we do.
At any given time, they absolutely do. They flood our resources, create opportunities. They have control. They can create situations that they will have control. But what's really frustrating, when you listen to far left liberals and they talk about how much they care about people, if they truly cared about people, they would want this crisis to end, because what we're doing is we're forcing people into indentured servitude. Look, I make a good living. I don't have $50,000 just laying around to give to a cartel to take me to another country. So when these people come to our country and they're in debt thousands of dollars, they must go into indentured servitude to pay that debt back. That cartel will get paid. So everything that we see, yes, it's not humane, but it's not humane because of what Joe Biden says. It's not humane because these people are entering a contract where they're going to have to pay these cartels back, and that means they're going to serve them until that payment goes back. So yes, the cartels create opportunities. We're reactive. We're not proactive. They create opportunities, and then on top of it, the humane aspect of it is these people are going into indentured servitude, and it's because of our policies that allow that to happen.
Thank you. That absolutely is shameful that's put upon so many people to enter into indentured servitude, to have an opportunity to come into our country. That is not the American dream. You know, I've stood at naturalization ceremonies, and I've seen the people who have counted the cost to be United States citizens and invested their lives, their resources, their time, their minds. And I've also seen the conviction in their eyes once they are a naturalized citizen, and when they gaze upon our flag of the United States of America, that they know that that is the one true symbol of liberty and justice for all. And they were willing to pay the price because they knew that they had it in them to help make this a better union. And that's who we want here. We don't want the criminal aliens who aren't going through the processing at the border, who are coming through and are part of the gotaways because they have bad intents, ill intents in our country. Now, one more question before I wrap up. We are looking into impeaching Secretary Mayorkas. Is it true Secretary Mayorkas knows how to have operational control at our southern border, that he has served in an administration that had operational control, and that he willfully has neglected the control at the southern border in allowing this surge, Mr. Judge?
I can confidently say that Border Patrol agents want him impeached. Absolutely. They want that honest conversation. That impeachment will drive that honest conversation of what's happening. He knows what he needs to do. He knows that there are certain solutions. He also knows that he has to enforce the law on the back end when people get released. He's not doing that. His words have convicted him. His actions have convicted him.
Thank you. I just will end with, Madam Chair, now is the time to secure our southern border. We need the policies in place to do that, to keep Americans safe. We need President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, end catch and release, and send the illegals back. Buses brought them in, and buses can take them out. We have got to secure our country and put America first, finally. Thank you, Madam Chair.
For the American people who are watching today, there is a reason that the border crisis is the #1 issue, and it is because it has been a catastrophe of Joe Biden's making. You heard from members all across this country who talked about how every state is a border state, whether it's New York, Colorado, Indiana, Pennsylvania. We heard from Texas, West Virginia, Illinois, Louisiana, Minnesota. Every state is facing this border crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis, a national security crisis with hundreds on the terrorist watch list. It is an economic crisis, a sovereignty crisis, and a constitutional crisis. House Republicans will continue to lead on securing the border and returning to the most secure border policies that we've ever seen under President Trump. We passed the Secure the Border Act. We know we need to return to the Remain in Mexico policy. We must end catch and release. We have to support our Border Patrol officers and our local law enforcement across this country, and we have to continue building the wall. We passed our Secure the Border bill. We will continue to stand to make sure that we're protecting this great nation, and we will hold Secretary Mayorkas and, most importantly, President Joe Biden accountable, and the American people are going to hold them accountable as well. Thank you very much to our guests who are here today. Thank you, Anne, on behalf of so many victims of human trafficking that are facing this humanitarian scourge. Thank you, Brandon Judd, for your advocacy on behalf of your colleagues in the Border Patrol. I represent Border Patrol agents in my district who we work with every day. So as you talked about the challenges they're facing because of the surge on both the southern and northern border, we hear that every single day from my constituents. And thank you, Sheriff, on behalf of all the incredible law enforcement officers, including the 15 county sheriffs in my district who work so hard every day. We're so grateful for your leadership. Thank you very much.